All right, we're going to dive into one of history's most, well, terrifying chapters, the rise and fall of Nazi Germany. We're going to look at how a modern, sophisticated country was twisted into a war machine that nearly conquered a continent, only to be completely consumed by its own fire. Let's get into it.
The thing you have to wrap your head around is this incredible paradox. In just 12 short years, from 1933 to 1945, Germany went from being an economic basket case to the absolute master of Europe, and then, just as quickly, collapsed into total ruin. It was an unbelievable rise and an equally spectacular fall.
So you've got to ask, right? How? How on earth does something like this happen, and so fast, in a country that was supposed to be one of the most advanced in the world? Well, that's exactly what we're here to unpack.
You see, this whole story, it doesn't start with victory. It starts with absolute, soul-crushing humiliation. After Germany lost World War I, the nation was on its knees. And that kind of desperation, well, it creates the perfect breeding ground for extremism. It all started with the Treaty of Versailles. It basically put all the blame for the war on Germany. And the price tag for that blame, get this, $33 billion in reparations. It was a completely impossible amount of money that was designed to crush the German economy for generations.
The result was pure financial chaos. To try and pay the debt, the government just printed money and printed and printed until it was basically worthless. So what does worthless look like? By 1923, a single loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. I mean, just try to imagine your entire life savings becoming worthless overnight.
And right into that chaos, that despair, steps Adolf Hitler. He gave people a simple, seductive story. Hey, none of this is your fault. He pointed the finger at scapegoats, Jewish people, socialists, basically anyone he decided wasn't truly German, and promised to make Germany strong again. For a nation that desperate, that was an incredibly powerful message. Okay. So once he's in power, Hitler and his propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, they don't just hope people will follow along. No, they engineer it. They used a very specific set of psychological tools to get inside the heads of an entire country.
Way back when, the Greek philosopher Aristotle figured out there are three main ways to persuade people. Well, the Nazis, and pretty much every dictator, they picked their favorite, and they stuck with it. Pathos, an appeal directly to your emotions. Think of it like this. Healthy democracies try to run on logic, on reason. They ask you to think. Dictatorships, though, they flip that script completely. They weaponize emotion. They don't ask you to think, they ask you to feel. Feel pride, feel fear, feel nationalism. It's a way to bypass critical thinking entirely. And to make sure emotion was king, they had to just erase logic. They literally held massive book burnings, destroying anything they considered un-German. They put loyal Nazis in charge of universities, pushed insane pseudoscience to back up their racist ideas, and chased away some of the world's greatest thinkers, like Albert Einstein.
And this quote from Goebbels, it says it all. When he says character, he doesn't mean having integrity or being a good person. He means blind loyalty, unquestioning obedience. In the Third Reich, the goal wasn't to educate you, it was to indoctrinate you. And the propaganda got really weird. It was all about building Hitler up into this messianic, savior-like figure. He even secretly wrote his own biography where he's compared to Jesus Christ, the one destined to rescue Germany. Yeah, this wasn't politics anymore. It was the creation of a cult. So with the entire country's mindset completely under his thumb, Hitler took all that fervor and weaponized it into one of the most terrifying military forces in history. Which brings us to the Blitzkrieg war machine.
The key to Germany's early military dominance was this revolutionary tactic, Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. The whole point was to avoid getting bogged down in trenches. You just hit the enemy with everything you had. Tanks, planes, super hard and super fast, causing total panic and collapse before they even knew what hit them.
But there was a dark little secret behind this almost superhuman speed. German soldiers were given millions and millions of tablets of a drug called Pervitin. Today, we'd call it crystal meth. It allowed them to fight for days on end with no sleep, pushing the Blitzkrieg forward at a completely unnatural pace.
And wow, did it work? The dominoes of Europe just started to fall, one after another, with shocking speed. Austria was annexed, then Czechoslovakia was invaded, then Poland, and then the big one, France. A country that held out for 4 years in World War I collapsed in just 6 weeks. By the summer of 1940, Hitler was the undisputed master of Western Europe.
You know, the Reich's ambition wasn't just on the battlefield. You had things like the Hindenburg airship, this massive, gleaming symbol of Nazi technology and power. But its fiery crash in 1937, well, it became a different kind of symbol, didn't it? A pretty powerful preview of what happens when unchecked ambition comes crashing down to earth.
At this point, at the absolute height of his power, Hitler seemed completely unstoppable. But then came a string of crucial mistakes, huge blunders, that would turn the tide of the entire war. This is where we see the beginning of the end.
That first real crack in the Nazi armor appeared in the skies over Great Britain. See, Hitler fully expected the UK to just give up after France fell, but they refused. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, tried to bomb them into submission, but they just couldn't defeat Britain's Royal Air Force. It was Hitler's first real, undeniable military failure.
So, frustrated that he couldn't beat Britain, Hitler then made what many historians call his single greatest blunder. The one catastrophic mistake that would ultimately consume his entire war machine.
In June 1941, he turned east and invaded the Soviet Union. And after some early victories, his massive army got bogged down and then completely swallowed by the brutal Russian winter. The real turning point came at the Battle of Stalingrad, where an entire German army was wiped out. Look at this number. 300,000. That's how many German soldiers were lost in that one single battle. It was a disaster on a scale they couldn't recover from.
So, while Germany is bleeding to death in the snows of Russia, its ally Japan makes its own world-changing miscalculation. The attack on Pearl Harbor awakens a sleeping giant, and just like that, the full industrial power of the United States is officially in the war, and the fate of the Axis powers is pretty much sealed.
Now, Germany was trapped in a two-front war it simply could not win. The final years were just a brutal, grinding collapse as the Allied powers closed in from all sides.
The end came like a giant pincer movement. On D-Day, you had the Western Allies landing in France and pushing from the West. At the same time, the massive Soviet army was relentlessly pushing from the East. Caught in this vice, the German military was systematically crushed. Finally, with Soviet shells raining down on Berlin, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. A few days later, Germany surrendered. It was over.
The war left Europe in absolute ruins. Borders were completely redrawn. Germany itself was divided, and in a global effort to make sure this kind of catastrophe could never happen again, the world came together to form new institutions, most famously the United Nations.
And this really brings us to our final thought. The Third Reich itself lasted only 12 years, but it left behind a permanent, chilling warning. Because the tools it used, the manipulation of emotion, the creation of scapegoats, the attack on logic and reason, those things didn't die in that bunker in 1945. So the real question for all of us today is this: how do we recognize and resist those ideas to make sure they never, ever get the chance to take root again?